The number one mistake I see coaches make when playing against the zone is they treat it the same way as if they were playing against a man defense. Hi, my name is Coach William Lowe, and if these videos are giving you value, make sure to hit the like button. If you want to receive videos like these every single week, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Today we're going to do a two-part series on how to break down any kind of zone defense. Unless you have professional level players, playing against a zone is very different from playing against a man. It takes a different type of mentality. You may run into spaces that you normally wouldn't if you're going to play against a man because it's considered bad spacing. But today we're going to go through what it takes, what the zone defense does want to see and what it doesn't want to see, so that you have every edge the next time you play against a zone defense. Let's dive into it. In order for you to get maximum value out of myself and Strive, make sure you go to school.com to join our online community. It's a community full of like-minded coaches supporting each other to get to wherever they want to go in their career and in life in general. So we're going to be talking about 5 different points about what the zone absolutely love, and they absolutely want to see the offense do exactly this. So if you do these 5 things, you are surely not going to break the zone. So the first point is that the zone loves a lot of standing around, no movement, no cutting, no penetration, just swinging the ball from side to side and never puncturing the zone. Never moving, never cutting, and never being deceptive at all. That is the first thing that the zone loves to see. So if you want to break the zone, you got to make sure that there's plenty of movement going on, they're being unpredictable, and you're hitting certain spots of the zone, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So the second thing that the zone loves to see is consistency of a matchup. That means that wherever a certain offensive player is standing, it is clear who is guarding that player. A lot of the times, it can be seen in things like the corner, the block, things of those areas. It's very clear who's guarding them. Say I'm playing a 2-3 zone. If I'm standing in the corner against a 2-3 zone, well then the outer lower man is going to get that person. So that's very easy to communicate who has them. There are other places on the court that could be slightly more deceptive where communication is required in order to know who is to guard that player. But if we're standing in spots that's clear who is guarding who, that is something that the zone loves to see. The third thing that the zone wants to see if you're playing against them is consistency. There's many, many ways to play against the zone, but if I have a player who's consistently at certain spots, say the high post, say the low block here, the short corner, these are very good spots, but at the same time, it's very clear who is guarding that person, and very rarely do you get an interchange of different people. The zone loves to see the same person in that spot not doing a whole lot of moving because they don't need to worry about where that person is going next. So again, going back to the first point, movement kills zones. The next thing that the zone loves to see is quick, contested threes. Now, not every 3 is created equal, especially against a zone. Not every 3 is created equal because a wide open 3 in transition is not the same as a 3 that has gone inside and then back out. So if the ball goes inside and then back out, that shot is usually a far higher percentage. If the ball goes inside against a zone, very, very likely the zone has totally collapsed in order to help on that ball. And any shot that is rushed or is contested is exactly what the zone wants to see. So in order to do just the opposite, we need to be patient and we need to know where to look and when to look for those spots in order to create the best possible shot that we want as offensive players. And now the last point that the zone absolutely loves and wants to see is that guy who takes a million dribbles but goes nowhere against the zone. Is that guy who tries to play it 1-on-5 but has very, very little success. If you think about it, I think we all know that guy. But rather than keeping the ball in one spot and being so inefficient with your dribbles, anytime you play against zone, it's not that dribble penetrations are not necessary, but we need to be precise with each and every dribble that we take rather than staying in one spot and being stationary. Now we're going to go over things that the zone doesn't want you to do. So if you guys want to break down the zone efficiently and in a number of different ways, you will do these things. The first thing that the zone does not want you to do is they don't want you to stand in spaces that are unclear on who is guarding who. These spaces can often be, say this is a 2-3 zone. The middle, who is guarding this guy? Is it this guy or is it this guy? The high post, Who is guarding this guy? This guy, or this guy? Who is guarding the break? This guy or this guy? Who's guarding the short corner? Is it this guy or this guy? Now, it's not to say that zones that are well drilled and well trained don't know who's guarding, but instinctively, when the ball's at a certain place, like the high post, these two guards are going to want to help, even though it may be this person's job. So standing in the right locations is paramount when trying to break the zone. Movement on the blind side against a zone is something that is very, very hard to guard and is very dangerous. And I'm going to explain what that means in a second. So say that the ball is here, right? Any movement on this help side or weak side of the floor is very dangerous for a zone. Say that the ball goes into this side of the post, right? This emergence from the weak side or the blind side is very, very difficult and is not what the zone wants to see. The next thing is cuts from the blind side. Cuts coming up to the high post, to the top of the key, or even emerging into the short corner, the low post, is something that is very hard to guard because it's movement. It is something that's coming from behind the zone. It is something that's coming from where the zone cannot see. So the cuts that are occurring on this side of the floor, very, very dangerous. Another thing that I mentioned before, I'm gonna make it clear here, is any cuts that happen behind the zone, especially when it comes from the short corner. Because if the goalie here is looking towards the ball and I all of a sudden emerge from the opposite short corner and seal, well, that's a possible threat right here, and someone can cut there to get a wide open layup. But movement from the blind side of the zone is very, very important to happen. We'll explain more when it comes to screens, but it's paramount that you guys know how important it is from a lot of movement to happen from away from the ball. So the next thing that the zone hates is what we call puncturing. Puncturing like a needle into the balloon. I've switched up the zone a little bit, but it doesn't really matter what kind of zone you use. The next thing that the zone doesn't like is when you can get into the gut of the zone. If the ball gets entered into here and then back out. I'm just gonna use this as it collapses a little bit and then back out. These are very, very hard to guard, especially, let's put it in a different spot now. Let's say it's the short corner. If we're able to reverse the ball onto the other side of the floor. This is very difficult because now you've created long closeouts against the zone, and if there are diving cutters, usually, say the ball was right there, and then this guy might have to come out if it's a 2-3 zone, right, and play them. If there's a guy in the high post and they just dive, that's a wide open layup. Or this guy can duck it. These are very important to be able to puncture the zone. I don't care what type of zone you play against. Anything that can go in and out and in and out combined with diving cutters is very, very dangerous if you are playing a zone because it's unpredictable and at the same time it is very hard to guard. And then last but not least, this is my preference, unless you are playing at a very, very high level, penetrations against the zone are not as good as passes into the zone. Now, let me make it very clear that if you are able to penetrate against the zone and get them to collapse and you can dish it back out, by all means, please do that. What I'm trying to say is if you are going to dribble against the zone, make every dribble very precise for the most part, okay? 99% of the time, you are dribbling north-south. That means you're dribbling towards the rim. There are times where you may dribble east-west to set up something to happen, but you have to be very precise that every single dribble is to collapse the zone or to score immediately. What the zone doesn't want to see is you play hot potato with the ball. That means we're catching, moving, cutting, and different people are going into different spots. It's much harder to guard because the ball moves faster than a person does. So think about it. When do I need to penetrate? When do I need to pass the ball and then move? The zone is counting on you only acting on the perimeter and never puncturing it, and therefore never threatening the collapse of the zone. So no matter what zone you're gonna play, there are certain characters and roles of which are going to allow you to play a successful zone offense. These roles are obviously the ball handler, then you have the reversal person, you have the strong side person, you have the weak side person, and usually you have the post person. I want to give credit to Don Kelbeck for giving me this idea of the different roles, but at the same time, I came up with my own version of it, and I encourage you to come up with your own version of it. And now I'm going to talk about each and every individual role. The ball handler is the most clear. It's the guy with the ball, it's the person who makes the decisions. The reversal role is the person who shortens the distance between the entire reversal. So there are different ways to reverse the ball. Number one, you can reverse it through the middle. That's what that person is there for. Number two, you can reverse it through the post. That means you put the ball into the post and the post reverse it. Number three, you can directly reverse it even though it's very dangerous against the zone. So that reversal person is there to shorten the distance and make sure that reversal against the zone is safe. Number three, we're going to talk about the strong side person. A lot of the times when you play against a zone, the way to beat it is to overload one side. Now, this is what we mentioned before. This is why playing against a zone is different from playing against a man, because the spacing may not necessarily be very good if you're playing against a man. But the strong side threat guarantees that there's an overload on one side to make sure that the entire zone has to move over to one side of the court, which then leaves the weak side very, very open. Number four, we're talking about the weak side threat. The weak side threat is usually the person who scores the most points. Because just as I mentioned, once you overload one side of the floor, the entire zone is going to shift over, forgetting about that one or two guys who are still on the weak side of the floor. If you know how to catch and shoot wide open, or you know how to set a pin screen for your teammate, or you know how to dive, I guarantee you against a zone that's 8 points right there if you know how to play on the weak side. Last but not least, we always have to put pressure on the rim, and that's our post threat. Whether it's a constant person who's playing in the post, or there's various different persons playing in the high post or the low post, we must always put pressure on the rim, because if we put pressure on the rim, the zone has to collapse slightly, which allows us to do more on the perimeter. So that comes to the conclusion of the first episode of this two-part series on how to play against the zone. There's literally infinite ways that we can play against the zone. My goal today is not to teach you how to play against the zone or what zone offense to run against the zone, but it's more, what are the concepts that we need to know when playing against the zone? Who are the people that we need to have when playing against the zone? And what to look for when playing against the zone? It breaks my heart when a really good offensive team, who usually play against a man, go up against the zone and then just bomb it because they take the same approach. Again, unless you're professional level athletes where you can just set a ball screen and it's a wide open three and it goes in every single time, we need to be a little bit smarter and think about playing the zone a little bit differently from when we play against a man. I appreciate you guys staying to the very end, and if this video is giving you value, make sure you hit the like button. If you want to make sure that you get these videos every single week, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next week.